This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. We're thrilled today to be joined by an unusual entrepreneur, Rick Levin, who built in this fascinating business, an auction business where they auction real estate, sort of against the tide, but it's been tremendously successful over the last 30 years at this, really, almost 30 years. And what's fascinating about Rick is he just flew in. We're so lucky to have him with us in person today. He flew in from Los Angeles, where he lives in part in Southern California. God knows why he comes back to Chicago regularly, but we're thrilled to have him with us today. We're going to talk to him about building a business, founding a business, about the economy, how the economy impacts the real estate auction business, and a lot more. Rick, can you take a moment and introduce yourself?
Sure. Rick Levin. I've been in both the real estate and personal property auction business based here in Chicago for 34 years now. And the assets have been large buildings, small buildings, homes, townhomes, condos, home sites, large parcels of vacant land. They've been aircraft, vessels, horses in Arizona, cab medallions in Boston, 52,000 pounds of smoked frozen scallops in Baltimore, and all sorts of assets. And the clients have been wealthy people, poor people, the heirs of people that have passed away, the U.S. Treasury, the IRS, the Secret Service, the U.S. Customs, ATF, the U.S. Postal Service, courts, and a whole plethora of other types of corporations and private sellers.
You know, and I've seen over the years, starting in real estate, but then working for the Department of Defense, selling stuff for the Department of Defense, I believe.
We do an auction every year for the Army the last 11 years, yeah.
For the Army, I've also seen the post office, sold the post office, which is a fantastic, iconic property in Chicago, that as well. What do you look for? I mean, I know what's fascinating about the auction business. You've done well throughout the last 34 years. Sometimes when the economy tanks, people are more anxious to auction things. I remember in 2008, the Great Recession, you auctioning off thousands of homes in Michigan, thousands of homes in different places. Talk a little bit about that when big sellers end up with trouble and getting the auction. And then you've also got people are just ready to sell.
Right.
But trying to find the right price.
Well, the 2008 to 2012 period was a fabulous time for us. And our biggest client was the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation that had us do over 500 auctions for the personal property from failed banks all over the country. But the quandary is auctions are a very, very old profession, one of the oldest professions known to man, actually. And if you had a Monet or a Van Gogh, you typically wouldn't put it in a store and put a price tag on it. You typically auction it. The normal way that the U.S. government refinances the national debt every week is at a treasury auction. The normal way that a farm is sold in the United States is at auction. eBay is a very popular business on the internet, that auction model, and the ad space auctions are popular. But if you attach the word real estate auction to properties in metropolitan areas of the United States, it's synonymous with deal or opportunity. And that has been somewhat frustrating to me over the years because very often when there's when someone has a very desirable property in a metropolitan area and a lot of people are interested in that property to buy it, the seller never thinks of doing an auction. But that is the time to do it because they have one property and they have a lot of interest. Unfortunately, when no one's interested in buying that property, then they think of doing an auction just to find the market, if you will. And the price typically reflects what the market is. And if you have an asset that nobody wants, or not many people want, typically the price is disappointing. So the auction method really gets a negative connotation. And when the economy was soft in 2008 to 2012, we had an uptick in our business. And when the economy was good, we have less sellers, which is ironic because when the economy is good, that's really when more sellers should use auctions if they wanted to maximize price.
And what I find fascinating is you're one of the most fascinating business leaders I get to talk to regularly. And over the last 10, 15 years, since last recession, you've remained very busy. I think you're crazily busy the last couple of years without even really picking up the phone and doing direct outbound marketing to try and pick up business. Crazily busy. I see you sell hospitals, schools, horses, everything that needs to be sold. and similarly with really, really pleased customers. The auction business, little higher percentage than traditional real estate, but also a ton more, from what I could tell, hands-on management by yourself. Why is it that you've been so successful at this, so good at it, and it still remains a space where there's not that many people in it? Is it because it requires so much hands-on expertise that you really develop a niche in this that others have a hard time driving into it, and it requires more time and effort and energy than a traditional realtor or traditional whatever?
Yeah, I am a member of the National Association of Realtors, based here in Chicago, the largest trade association in the United States with 1.4 million members. And they do have a little, years ago, I was on a little auction committee trying to educate more real estate brokers into using auctions versus private treaty. And there's been a lot of upheaval, in the real estate business about commissions and sharing commissions and who pays for commissions. There was a big lawsuit that NAR is trying to overcome this year. But I think it's an educational process for not only sellers but buyers, certainly for real estate agents, as to what would be the most advantageous and expedient way to sell a property and at a fair market price. The real estate business and real estate assets, the bottom line is it's inefficient and they're illiquid. And if you look at your balance sheet, you've got your liquid assets, your stocks and your bonds, and you've got your illiquid assets. And it's almost the definition of an illiquid asset is a piece of real estate, because there is no liquid market. Ironically, a well thought out, large scale auction mechanism could add liquidity to the largest asset class in the world, real estate, but no one has really figured it out. And I've tried. It's a very large undertaking to change everyone's behavior with typically their most valuable asset.
Yeah, no, and I'm always amazed because you've done this fantastic job of it. You've made a great living. You've put a ton of money away. You've just done a magnificent job in this business of taking care of customers. And talk about that, because I've seen you over the years constantly working with customers to make sure they maximize their asset. You talk about having backup bidders. You talk about doing different types of things to make sure they succeed and they thrive. What advice do you have for founders, for business owners? What advice do you have? What couple of pieces of advice do you have for people about business?
Well, interesting. It's a great question. And I've been forced into being a good communicator with my clients, because typically what we're trying to do is accelerate a 6-month or 1-year sales process, which would be the norm in selling a commercial or residential property. Very often sellers are asked to sign 6-month agreements or 1-year agreement being the norm. And we try to do it in 30 or 45 days. So by doing it that quickly, you need a lot of information from the seller. You need to disseminate a lot of information to potential buyers so that everybody's comfortable. And that requires a lot of back and forth communication. And I'm always amazed when someone might have a multi-million-dollar property and I'm talking to them on a regular basis, weekly, daily, and sometimes they're almost annoyed that I'm trying to extract information like tax bills and surveys and site plans. And they would say, the last broker who had my listing for 4 years, I have some of those people this year,
Sure,
who had my listing for 4 years, I sometimes didn't hear from him and her for 3 months. And it's always kind of amazing to me that you can have that relationship with a client and just kind of not talk to them. And it almost makes me think either the middle person didn't care, or they almost were avoiding their client because they had nothing good to say.
And that happens in communication. One of the things I'm so impressed by people is when people that are willing to. Nobody wants to hear bad news all the time, but when you have great people that you work with that are willing to tell you, hey, we got a problem with this, and then you could solve the problem versus just letting it sit and fester. I think that communication's so important. Are you ever amazed that some real estate agents, and this is true in any business, are developing whole inventory of things to sell, and they're not really working them very hard? They're not really that motivated in each particular property. Then you see other people. I see it in the real estate business. I obviously see it with you, that when you have a listing, it's almost like a fantastic investment banker that is really working that effort rather than just trying to collect a catalog of companies to sell and hope they've got inventory and hope that it pops up, but really working it and trying to find the right buyer, trying to move the product.
Yeah, I don't know if the word is conflict of interest, but every once in a while, I'll run into a situation where a broker in a small metro area, say a suburb of the United States, is almost the maven or the guru in that neighborhood and has 200 listings. And they put billboards up. We see them as we drive around the country, billboards up. They put ads in the paper. But unfortunately, in that metro area, and it might be a small community, a suburb, whatever, there might only be 5 sales a month, 10 sales a month, but they've got 200 listings. And so if you go look at one of their properties and you don't like it, they say, don't worry, I've got 199 other things to show you. When it comes time to sell your property, most consumers probably go with the big 800-pound gorilla in that town and give their listing to that successful, what appears to be that successful person. Probably is very successful, but how in the world could that seller, that middle person, that agent, devote all their attention to one seller's needs when they have 200, and the conflict of interest of whose sale is more important than the other? What seller? So, when you're a smaller boutique firm, which at the end of the day we are, the needs of the seller become so much more apparent, I think, to me.
Right, but it's
so I have to
me,
kind of
it's so much
address
for me to
that.
say, like, you're Rick Levin of the Rick Levin and Associates. I see you every day in the Wall Street Journal and other places. It's so much for me to hear yourself describe yourself as a small boutique firm when you become that dominant a force in the business that you're in. Is that real humility? Is that false humility? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. But the reality is, real estate is a local business. And people have tried from an ivory tower in New York or California to homogenize it and just make it so that you can push a button and sell a property. But at the end of the day, people still, even with the advances of the internet, want to go and touch and feel a property. And short of a triple net CVS or Walgreens that is a prototypical building in Dallas, so you can buy it. If you're in Boston, some people may never go see the property they own because they're just buying it based on the income coming from the lease and the credit quality of the tenant. Chances are real estate's a local business. So it's really hard to be the biggest player all over the country, unless you are one of the 800-pound gorillas of CBRE or Jones Lang, one of those great companies, or Remax or Century 21. But they, of course, that's their name brand. They've got individual agents, if you will,
often different franchises like Keller Williams,
correct, in different markets all over the country. So they can say that they're the greatest firm. Some of them are, but at the end of the day, you're probably dealing one-on-one with an agent that you like.
Got it. I want to thank you again. We're with Rick Levin of Rick Levin and Associates, one of the best known auction companies in the world. Sotheby's, Rick Levin, both real estate, everything else as well. Department of Defense I've watched over the years, just fascinating. ATF, scallops from Boston. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Let's
Baltimore.
hope they get from Baltimore. Let's hope the scallops get sold quickly and
Cab medallions in Boston.
Cab medallions in Boston, but scallops in Baltimore. We were close.
Right.
Rick, it's always great to visit with you on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. One of the best in the business, Rick Levin. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.